16-year-old Aaron Campbell walked through the dark streets of Rothsay, Isle of Bute, at 1:54 a.m. on July 2, 2018, armed with a kitchen knife and driven by impulses he would later describe with chilling satisfaction. The small Scottish island, population 7,000, was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked, where children played freely in the streets, where violent crime was so rare that the community hadn't seen a murder in decades. But on that summer night, Aaron entered an unlocked home on Ardbeg Road, intending to steal cannabis from a man he knew. Instead, he found 6-year-old Alesha MacPhail sleeping peacefully in her bedroom, a Peppa Pig DVD playing quietly in the background. What happened next would shatter the innocence of an entire island and raise profound questions about the nature of evil, the capacity for violence that can exist in teenagers, and whether some crimes are so monstrous that youth cannot shield perpetrators from the harshest consequences. Aaron picked up the sleeping child, carried her out of the house, walked her to the ruins of a demolished hotel, and there, in the darkness, he raped and murdered her. When her body was discovered hours later, the autopsy would reveal 117 injuries, catastrophic trauma inflicted on a child so small, so defenseless, so utterly innocent, that even veteran investigators struggled to comprehend the level of violence. Aaron returned home, showered, went to bed, and in the morning, he joined the search parties looking for the missing girl he had killed. He comforted Alesha's family members. He posted messages on social media expressing shock and sadness. And when police eventually arrested him 3 days later, he maintained his innocence with such conviction that he attempted to frame someone else for the crime. But forensic evidence, CCTV footage, DNA, fibers from his clothing, built an inescapable case against him. At his trial in February 2019, the jury took just 3 hours to convict him of abduction, rape, and murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 27 years, one of the longest sentences ever imposed on a teenager in Scottish legal history. And in a final act of callousness, Aaron confessed before sentencing, telling the court he was quite satisfied with the murder. If you're watching this video, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. Your support helps us continue bringing these important stories to light. The Isle of Bute is a small island in the Firth of Clyde on the west coast of Scotland, accessible by a 35-minute ferry ride from the mainland. Its largest town, Rothsay, is a Victorian seaside resort with colorful buildings lining the waterfront, Gothic architecture dating back centuries, and a pace of life that feels removed from the modern world. In 2018, the island had a population of approximately 6,500 people, many of them retirees drawn by the peaceful environment and tight-knit community. Crime was virtually non-existent, the kind of place where people knew their neighbors, where children could walk to school alone, where the biggest news stories involved community festivals and local sports. Alesha Sarah MacPhail was born on October 22, 2011, in Airdrie, North Lanarkshire, Scotland, to parents Georgina Lochrain and Robert MacPhail. Georgina, known as Jeannie to friends and family, was young when she had Alesha, just 18 years old, but she devoted herself to motherhood with fierce love and determination. Robert, known as Bobby, was similarly young and struggled with the responsibilities of fatherhood in those early years. The relationship between Georgina and Robert was tumultuous, marked by frequent arguments and periods of separation. And by the time Alesha was 2 years old, her parents had split permanently. Georgina retained primary custody, while Robert maintained regular contact with his daughter. Alesha was described by everyone who knew her as a bright, energetic child with an infectious smile and boundless curiosity. She loved Peppa Pig, as many children her age do, and would watch episodes repeatedly, acting out scenes with her toys. She loved dressing up, playing with dolls, and spending time outdoors. Her favorite color was pink, and she insisted on wearing pink clothes whenever possible. She attended Chapel Hall Primary School in Airdrie, where teachers described her as friendly, sociable, and eager to learn. She had many friends and was invited to birthday parties regularly. Her life, while marked by her parents' separation, was otherwise normal and happy, filled with the simple joys of childhood. In the summer of 2018, Alesha was invited to spend 2 weeks on the Isle of Bute with her father, Robert, who had moved there to live with his parents, Angela and Callum MacPhail, in their home on Ardbeg Road in Rothesay. Robert had been struggling with depression and unemployment on the mainland, and had relocated to Bute seeking a fresh start and family support. He worked occasional odd jobs and spent much of his time at his parents' home, which sat just a few hundred feet from the waterfront, with views across the Firth of Clyde. Georgina was initially hesitant about allowing Alesha to make the trip. It would be the longest time they had been apart since Alesha's birth. But Robert assured her that Alesha would be safe, that she would have a wonderful time exploring the island and spending time with her grandparents. Georgina ultimately agreed, and on Saturday, June 30th, 2018, Robert picked up Alesha from Airdrie and made the drive to Wemyss Bay, where they caught the ferry to Rothesay. It was a beautiful summer day, and Alesha was excited about the adventure ahead. She had packed her favorite toys, her Peppa Pig pajamas, and an iPad loaded with games and videos. As they drove onto the ferry, Georgina waved goodbye from the dock, blowing kisses to her daughter. It was the last time she would see Alesha alive. Alesha's first 2 days on Bute were filled with the kind of simple pleasures that make childhood summers memorable. Her grandparents took her for walks along the waterfront, bought her ice cream from a local shop, and let her stay up late watching movies. On Sunday evening, July 1st, the family had dinner together, fish and chips from a local takeaway, and then settled in to watch television. Alesha was tired from a day of playing outdoors and was put to bed around 11 p.m. in a small bedroom at the front of the house. Angela checked on her granddaughter at approximately 11:30 p.m. and found her fast asleep, her Peppa Pig DVD still playing quietly. Angela left the door slightly ajar and the hallway light on, as Alesha didn't like complete darkness. Then she went to her own room to sleep, as did Robert and his girlfriend Tony McLaughlin, who was also staying at the house. The front door to the MacPhail home was left unlocked. This was standard practice in Rothesay. Crime was so rare that many residents never locked their doors, even at night. The keys were left in the lock on the inside of the door. This detail would prove catastrophic. Aaron Thomas Campbell was born on May 15, 2002, in Glasgow, Scotland, the only child of Jeanette Campbell and Thomas Campbell. His early childhood was marked by instability and neglect. His parents' relationship was volatile, characterized by frequent arguments, substance abuse, and periods of homelessness. Social services became involved when Aaron was still a toddler, documenting concerns about his mother's ability to care for him properly. There were reports of Jeanette leaving young Aaron alone for extended periods, failing to provide adequate food and clothing, and exposing him to inappropriate adult situations. When Aaron was 5 years old, his parents separated, and Jeanette moved with him to various locations throughout Scotland, never staying in one place for long. They lived in temporary housing, with relatives, and at times in homeless accommodations. Aaron attended multiple schools, never staying long enough to form lasting friendships or academic continuity. Teachers at these schools noted that Aaron was often unkempt, hungry, and tired. He struggled socially, had difficulty following rules, and displayed concerning behaviors including aggression toward other children and cruelty to animals. But with each school move, these red flags were never properly documented or followed up on, and Aaron slipped through the cracks of a system that was supposed to protect him. In 2010, when Aaron was 8 years old, Jeanette and Aaron moved to the Isle of Bute, where Jeanette had secured a council flat in Rothesay. She was seeking yet another fresh start, away from the chaotic life she had led on the mainland. The island seemed like an ideal place to rebuild. Quiet, safe, close-knit. Aaron was enrolled in Rothesay Primary School, and for a while, things seemed to stabilize. Jeanette found work in local hotels and shops, and Aaron's behavior at school improved somewhat, though he remained a loner who struggled to make friends. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, Aaron was developing disturbing interests and behaviors that would only come to light after his arrest. He spent hours alone in his room, browsing the internet on devices with minimal parental supervision. His search history, later recovered by police, revealed an obsession with violent pornography, torture, and murder. He watched videos of people being killed, read about serial killers, and visited dark web forums where users shared extreme, violent content. He began fantasizing about committing acts of violence himself, particularly sexual violence against children. By the time Aaron was 14, his behavior had become increasingly concerning to those who knew him. He was described by classmates at Rothsay Academy, the local high school, as creepy and weird. He made inappropriate sexual comments to female students, stared at people in unsettling ways, and had few, if any, friends. He was caught bringing a knife to school on one occasion, claiming it was for protection, though he received only a brief suspension and no further intervention. Teachers noted his lack of empathy and his tendency to manipulate situations to his advantage. But these concerns were never escalated to the level of serious psychological evaluation. Aaron's relationship with his mother remained dysfunctional. Jeanette worked long hours and was often exhausted when she came home, leaving Aaron largely unsupervised. He stayed up late into the night, sleeping during the day, and spent most of his time alone. Neighbors occasionally heard shouting from their flat, Aaron and his mother arguing about his behavior, his refusal to help around the house, his demand for money. But these arguments were dismissed as typical teenage rebellion rather than signs of deeper pathology. In the months leading up to Alesha's murder, Aaron's online activity became increasingly disturbing. He researched how to get away with murder, how to dispose of bodies, how to avoid detection by police. He watched videos about forensic investigation and studied cases where killers had been caught to understand what mistakes they had made. He was preparing, planning, fantasizing about the day when he would cross the line from fantasy to reality. On the evening of July 1st, 2018, Aaron hosted a small party at his flat while his mother was working a night shift at a local hotel. About 15 friends and acquaintances attended, and alcohol was consumed freely. Aaron got drunk, as did most of the partygoers, and by midnight, everyone had left except for one friend who returned briefly around 12:30 a.m. to check on Aaron, whom he found in bed appearing suicidal and upset. Aaron claimed he had been arguing with his mother most of the night, though Jeanette was at work and hadn't been home. The friend offered to stay over, but Aaron declined, saying he was going to get stoned and wanted to be alone. After his friend left, Aaron sent text messages to several people asking if they could sell him cannabis. One of these messages went to Robert MacPhail, whom Aaron knew casually through mutual acquaintances on the island. Robert didn't respond. He was asleep. Aaron continued messaging other potential sources, but no one was available at that late hour. Frustrated and intoxicated, Aaron made a decision. He knew where Robert lived. He knew Robert sometimes had cannabis. He would go there and take it. At 1:54 a.m., Aaron left his flat armed with a kitchen knife he had taken from his mother's kitchen. Security cameras on the streets of Rothsay captured him walking purposefully through the empty town center, his hood pulled up, heading in the direction of Ardbeg Road. The walk took approximately 5 minutes. When he arrived at the MacPhail residence, he tried the front door and found it unlocked. He entered quietly, knowing that several people were sleeping in the house. Robert's bedroom was closest to the front door, and Aaron initially intended to enter that room to search for cannabis. But then he saw the open door to another bedroom. Curious, he approached and looked inside. There, illuminated by the soft glow of a nightlight, was 6-year-old Alesha MacPhail, fast asleep in her bed, her small form barely visible under the covers. Aaron would later tell forensic psychologists that in that moment, something shifted in his mind. "All I thought about was killing her once I saw her," he said. The opportunity he had fantasized about for so long was suddenly, impossibly, in front of him. A child, alone, vulnerable. And no one knew he was there. Aaron entered Alesha's room. He picked her up from the bed. She was small, weighing just over 40 pounds, and he lifted her easily, She stirred as he picked her up, waking partially, confused and drowsy. He carried her out of the house, closing the front door quietly behind him. No one in the house heard him. Robert, Tony, and Angela all slept through the abduction, unaware that anything was wrong. Aaron carried Alesha along Ardbeg Road toward the waterfront. CCTV cameras captured his hooded figure walking with something in his arms at 2:03 a.m. Alesha woke up fully during this walk. She asked Aaron who he was and where he was taking her. Aaron told her he knew her daddy and was taking her home. His voice was calm, almost soothing. Alesha, groggy and confused, seemed to accept this explanation and didn't struggle or cry out. She trusted adults. She had no reason to think she was in danger. Aaron carried Alesha to the grounds of the former Kyle's Hydropathic Hotel, now demolished, leaving only ruins and overgrown vegetation. The site was isolated, dark, and hidden from the road. Aaron set Alesha down. She was more awake now, looking around, starting to realize something was wrong. She asked to go home, asked for her daddy. Aaron didn't respond. Instead, he began to sexually assault her. The forensic evidence recovered from the scene and from Alesha's body would reveal the full horror of what happened next. Aaron raped the child. When she tried to scream, he put his hand over her mouth and nose, suffocating her. When she struggled, he pressed harder, applying crushing pressure to her face and neck. The medical examiner would later determine that Alesha suffered 117 separate injuries during the attack. Internal injuries from the sexual assault, external injuries from the force used to restrain and kill her, and evidence of prolonged suffering. The cause of death was determined to be pressure to the neck and face. Alesha's small body was left in the vegetation at the hotel ruins, partially hidden by bushes. Aaron gathered his clothes, which were now covered in blood and other biological evidence, and threw them into the sea. He walked home, stopping at the shore to wash his hands and face in the cold water. He entered his flat, stripped completely, and took a long shower, scrubbing every inch of his body. Then he returned to the murder site to retrieve his phone, which he had accidentally dropped during the attack. He walked past Alesha's body without a second glance and returned home again, finally going to bed around 4 a.m. At 6:23 a.m. on July 2, 2018, Tony McLaughlin woke up and went to check on Alesha. The bedroom was empty. The bed was cold. Alesha's shoes and jacket were still by the door, but she was gone. Tony immediately woke Robert and Angela, and they searched the house frantically, calling Alesha's name, checking every room, the garden, the street outside. There was no sign of her. At 6:23 a.m., Robert called 999 to report his daughter missing. The response from Police Scotland was immediate and comprehensive. Officers arrived at the MacPhail home within minutes and began a systematic search of the surrounding area. Volunteers from the community joined the search efforts as word spread through Rothsay that a young child was missing. Within hours, hundreds of people were combing beaches, woods, streets, and gardens, calling Alesha's name, distributing photos, checking sheds and outbuildings. The island's ferry service was alerted, and staff were asked to watch for anyone attempting to leave with a young girl. The entire community mobilized. Among the volunteers searching for Alesha was Aaron Campbell. He had woken around 10 a.m. and learned about the missing child through social media posts. He joined a search party and spent several hours walking through areas he knew perfectly well contained no trace of Alesha, because he knew exactly where she was. He spoke with members of Alesha's family, offering comfort and expressing hope that she would be found safe. He posted on Facebook, "Hope they find the wee girl. It's terrible what's happened." His performance was so convincing that no one suspected him. At 8:54 a.m., a member of the public walking a dog in the grounds of the old Kyle's Hotel found Alesha's body. She was lying face down in vegetation, naked from the waist down, clearly deceased. The walker immediately called police, and the area was sealed off as a crime scene. Forensic investigators arrived and began the grim work of documenting the scene and collecting evidence. The scale and severity of the injuries to Alesha's small body were immediately apparent, and investigators knew they were dealing with a sexual homicide of extraordinary brutality. The news that Alesha had been found dead spread through Rothsay within an hour. The community was devastated. Shock, grief, and fear rippled through the island. Parents held their children closer. Doors that had never been locked were suddenly bolted. The sense of safety that had defined life on Bute was shattered. And in the MacPhail home on Ardbeg Road, Robert and his family received the news that every parent dreads. Alesha was dead. She had been murdered. The details of what had happened to her were too horrific to comprehend. Georgina Loughran, Alesha's mother, was notified by police in Airdrie. She collapsed when told the news, screaming and inconsolable. She had sent her daughter to what she believed was a safe place, and now Alesha was gone, murdered in the most brutal way imaginable. Georgina's family surrounded her, trying to provide comfort, but nothing could ease the agony of a mother who has lost her child to violence. The investigation into Alesha's murder was led by Detective Superintendent Stuart Houston from Police Scotland's major investigation team. Within hours of the discovery of Alesha's body, a massive forensic operation was underway. The crime scene was processed meticulously, with every piece of physical evidence collected, photographed, and documented. CCTV footage from cameras throughout Rothsay was seized and analyzed. Door-to-door inquiries were conducted throughout the Ardbeg Road area and beyond. A public appeal was issued asking anyone with information to come forward. The forensic evidence from Alesha's body was sent to the Scottish Police Authority's Forensic Laboratory for urgent analysis. DNA samples were collected from under her fingernails, from biological material recovered during the post-mortem examination, and from fibers found on her body. These samples would prove crucial to identifying her killer. CCTV analysis revealed the key to the investigation. Footage showed a hooded figure walking along Ardbeg Road at 1:54 a.m. in the direction of the MacPhail house. Additional footage showed the same figure at 2:03 a.m. walking away from the area, carrying what appeared to be a small bundle. Further footage from 3:30 a.m. showed the same figure returning to the area, presumably to retrieve the dropped phone. While the person's face was not clearly visible in the footage, the clothing and body shape were distinctive. Police began compiling a list of everyone known to live in or visit the Ardbeg Road area. They conducted interviews with neighbors, asking if anyone had seen or heard anything unusual in the early hours of July 2nd. Most reported hearing nothing. They had slept through the entire night. But one neighbor mentioned seeing a teenager hanging around the area in recent weeks. A boy who didn't live on the street but seemed to be visiting someone. The neighbor couldn't recall the boy's name but provided a general description. Meanwhile, forensic scientists analyzing DNA evidence from Alesha's body made a breakthrough. They had extracted a partial DNA profile from biological material recovered during the post-mortem examination. DNA that did not belong to Alesha or any member of her family. The profile was run through the Scottish DNA database, which contains samples from anyone who has been arrested for certain offenses in Scotland. There was a match. Aaron Thomas Campbell. Aaron's DNA was in the database because he had been arrested for a minor offense 2 years earlier, an incident involving theft from a local shop. He had been charged, his DNA had been collected as part of standard procedure, and though the charges were eventually dropped, his DNA profile remained in the system. Now, that profile linked him to the murder of Alesha MacPhail. On July 5, 2018, just 3 days after Alesha's murder, police arrested Aaron Campbell at his home in Rothsay. He was brought to a police station in Greenock on the mainland for questioning. His mother Jeanette was shocked and insisted there must be some mistake. Her son couldn't possibly be involved in something so terrible. But the DNA evidence was conclusive. Aaron's genetic material had been found on Alesha's body in a context that could only mean he had sexually assaulted her. There was no innocent explanation. In his first police interview, Aaron maintained his innocence. He claimed he had been home all night, that he hadn't left his flat after his friend left around 1 a.m. When confronted with the CCTV footage showing someone matching his description in the area at the relevant times, Aaron claimed it must have been someone else. When told about the DNA evidence, Aaron appeared shocked and suggested that perhaps someone had planted it, or that there had been a contamination in the lab. He was calm, composed, and utterly convincing in his denials. Detectives who interviewed him later described him as one of the most manipulative suspects they had ever encountered. A teenager who showed no signs of guilt or anxiety despite overwhelming evidence of his involvement in a horrific crime. Aaron was formally charged with the abduction, rape, and murder of Alesha MacPhail on July 5, 2018. Due to his age, 16 years old at the time of the offense, he was initially granted automatic anonymity under Scottish law, meaning his name could not be published by media outlets. He was remanded in custody at Polmont Young Offenders Institution near Falkirk, where he was placed in isolation for his own protection. Other inmates, even young offenders with serious criminal histories, viewed child killers as the lowest form of criminal. And Aaron would have been at serious risk of violence had he been placed in the general population. In the months following Aaron's arrest, forensic investigators continued building the case against him. Analysis of his phone revealed extensive searches related to murder, how to cover up crimes, and how to get away with killing someone. His internet history showed he had visited websites discussing forensic techniques and had watched videos about police investigations. Perhaps most damning, his phone's GPS data placed him in the exact locations shown in the CCTV footage at the exact times the hooded figure appeared. There was also a search conducted on the morning of July 2nd for the news about Alesha's disappearance. Aaron had been checking to see if her body had been found yet. Fibers recovered from Alesha's body matched those from clothing seized from Aaron's flat, a distinctive brand and color of fabric that formed a unique link between him and the crime scene. Soil samples from his shoes matched the soil at the Kyle's hotel site. Every piece of physical evidence pointed inexorably to Aaron Campbell as Alesha's killer. But rather than accepting the overwhelming case against him, Aaron did something that shocked even seasoned investigators. He attempted to frame someone else for the crime. In September 2018, Aaron's legal team filed what is known in Scottish law as a special defense of incrimination, claiming that Tony McLaughlin, Robert MacPhail's girlfriend who had been sleeping in the house the night of the murder, was the actual killer. Aaron alleged that Tony had killed Alesha and then planted his DNA on the body to frame him. He provided no evidence to support this claim, and it contradicted all of the forensic evidence and CCTV footage. But under Scottish law, once such a defense is lodged, it must be addressed in court. The accusation devastated Tony McLaughlin. She had been in a relationship with Robert for several months and had been looking forward to spending time with his daughter during her visit to Bute. She had helped put Alesha to bed that night, had checked on her, had been sleeping in the house when Alesha was taken. The suggestion that she had murdered a 6-year-old child was not only false, but also cruel beyond measure. Tony cooperated fully with police, providing DNA samples, undergoing extensive interviews, and submitting to a polygraph examination, which she passed. Every aspect of her life was scrutinized, as Aaron's defense team attempted to find anything that might support their fabricated narrative. The trial of Aaron Thomas Campbell began on February 11, 2019, at the High Court in Glasgow before Judge Lord Matthews. Due to the nature of the charges and the age of both the victim and the defendant, the trial attracted enormous media attention from across the United Kingdom and internationally. The case had already become a national story, with widespread public outrage about the murder of such a young child in a place as seemingly safe as the Isle of Bute. Aaron, now 17 years old, sat in the dock wearing a suit and tie, looking like an ordinary teenager, rather than the brutal killer the evidence would reveal him to be. His mother Jeanette attended the trial daily, sitting in the public gallery with a mixture of grief and denial on her face, unable to reconcile the son she knew with the monster the prosecution would describe. Prosecutor Ian McSporran, QC, delivered an opening statement that laid out the evidence in methodical, devastating detail. He described Alesha as a happy, smiley little girl, whose life had been stolen by a teenager motivated by sexual violence and a complete lack of empathy. McSporran told the jury they would see CCTV footage showing Aaron carrying Alesha to her death, would hear DNA evidence that conclusively placed him at the scene, and would learn about Aaron's disturbing internet searches in the days before and after the murder. "The evidence in this case is overwhelming," McSporran told the jury. "Aaron Campbell took this little girl from her bed, carried her to a remote location, raped her, and killed her. Then he tried to cover up his crime, and when that failed, tried to blame someone else. The evidence will leave you in no doubt of his guilt." The defense, led by Brian McConaughey, QC, faced an almost impossible task. The evidence against Aaron was so strong that there was no realistic possibility of arguing for his innocence. McConaughey's strategy was to argue that while Aaron had killed Alesha, he had not intended to do so, that the killing had been the result of a loss of control during a sexual assault, which would reduce the charge from murder to culpable homicide. This argument required convincing the jury that Aaron, despite his extensive internet searches about murder and getting away with crime, had not planned to kill Alesha, but had done so in the heat of the moment. The trial lasted 9 days and featured testimony from dozens of witnesses, including police officers, forensic scientists, pathologists, and members of Alesha's family. The medical examiner, Dr. John Williams, provided detailed testimony about Alesha's injuries, explaining that she had suffered extensive trauma consistent with sexual assault and had died from sustained pressure to her face and neck. "The level of violence inflicted was extraordinary," Dr. Williams testified. "This child suffered terribly before she died." Forensic scientists testified about the DNA evidence linking Aaron to the crime. Dr. Sophie Glover, the lead forensic scientist, explained that Aaron's DNA had been found in multiple locations on Alesha's body, including in biological samples that could only have come from sexual contact. The DNA profile was complete and clear, with a statistical probability of 1 in a billion that it came from someone other than Aaron. "This is some of the strongest DNA evidence I have encountered in my career," Dr. Glover testified. "There is no doubt that Aaron Campbell had sexual contact with Alesha MacPhail." The CCTV footage was shown to the jury multiple times. The clips showed a hooded figure walking with obvious purpose toward the MacPhail residence, then walking away carrying something in his arms, then returning to the area later. Expert witnesses testified about analyzing the gait and body shape visible in the footage and compared it to video of Aaron walking. The similarities were striking and unmistakable. Perhaps the most emotional testimony came from Robert MacPhail, Alesha's father. He described the last time he saw his daughter alive, putting her to bed and kissing her goodnight, never imagining it would be the last time he would see her. He described waking up to find her gone, the frantic search, the moment police told him they had found her body. "My little girl was taken from me in the most horrible way," Robert said, his voice breaking. "She was just 6 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her, and this monster took it all away." When it came time for the defense to present their case, McConaughey called expert witnesses to testify about Aaron's mental state and his capacity to form the intention to kill. Dr. Gary McPherson, a forensic psychiatrist who had evaluated Aaron, testified that Aaron showed signs of conduct disorder and psychopathic traits, including a lack of empathy, manipulative behavior, and an inability to form genuine emotional connections. However, Dr. McPherson acknowledged that Aaron was capable of understanding right from wrong and was capable of forming intent. He was not insane or suffering from a mental illness that would diminish his criminal responsibility. The defense also called Jeanette Campbell, Aaron's mother, who testified about her son's troubled childhood and difficult upbringing. She described the instability, the frequent moves, the periods of homelessness. She acknowledged that she had not always been the best mother, that she had struggled with her own issues and had left Aaron alone too often. She insisted that her son was not a monster, that he had been failed by the systems that should have helped him, and that his actions, while terrible, were the result of a life of neglect and trauma. Her testimony was emotional and difficult to watch, but it did little to counteract the mountain of evidence showing that Aaron had planned, executed, and then tried to cover up the murder of a child. The prosecution's cross-examination of the defense witnesses was brutal and effective. MacPhail systematically dismantled the argument that Aaron had not intended to kill Alesha, pointing to his internet searches about murder, his bringing a knife with him when he left his flat, his choice to carry Alesha to a remote location rather than assault her in the house, and, most damning of all, his behavior after the murder, the covering up, the joining of search parties, the posting of sympathetic messages on social media, and the attempt to frame Tony McLaughlin.
These are not the actions of someone who lost control, MacPhail argued. These are the actions of a calculating, manipulative individual who knew exactly what he was doing and tried to get away with it. The special defense of incrimination against Tony McLaughlin was thoroughly debunked during the trial. Tony testified about the night of the murder, explaining that she had been asleep in Robert's room and had not left until morning. There was no physical evidence linking her to the crime, no DNA, no CCTV footage, no forensic traces of any kind. The defense's suggestion that she had somehow obtained Aaron's DNA and planted it on Alesha's body was shown to be not only implausible but impossible, given the timeline and the type of biological material involved. Judge Lord Matthews would later describe Aaron's attempt to frame Tony as wicked and an additional act of cruelty on top of the murder itself. On February 21, 2019, after hearing all the evidence and closing arguments from both sides, the jury retired to deliberate. They returned just 3 hours later with unanimous verdicts. Aaron Thomas Campbell was guilty of the abduction of Alesha MacPhail, guilty of rape, and guilty of murder. As the verdicts were read, Aaron showed no visible reaction. He sat motionless in the dock, staring straight ahead, while members of Alesha's family in the public gallery sobbed with relief and grief. Jeanette Campbell collapsed and had to be helped from the courtroom. Following the guilty verdicts, Judge Lord Matthews lifted the anonymity order that had prevented Aaron from being named in media reports. Given the age of the accused and the horrific nature of the crime, there is a strong public interest in identifying him, Lord Matthews stated. Aaron Thomas Campbell's name was immediately published by every major news outlet in the United Kingdom, and his photograph, showing a teenage boy with a vacant, emotionless expression, became one of the most widely circulated mugshots in recent British criminal history. The sentencing hearing took place on March 21, 2019, at the High Court in Glasgow. Before announcing the sentence, Judge Lord Matthews allowed victim impact statements from Alesha's family. Georgina Loughran spoke first. Her statement read aloud by a court official because she was too distraught to speak herself. "Alesha was my whole world," the statement read. "She was my beautiful, funny, loving little girl who made every day brighter. Aaron Campbell destroyed my life when he murdered my daughter. I will never recover from this. I will never be whole again. Alesha should be starting first grade this year. She should be learning to read, making friends, growing up. Instead, she's gone, taken from me in the most brutal way imaginable. I hope Aaron Campbell rots in prison for what he did." Robert MacPhail spoke next, his voice shaking with emotion and rage. "Aaron Campbell is evil," he said. "There's no other word for it. He took my daughter, my baby girl, and he did unspeakable things to her. He killed her, and then he joined the search parties looking for her. He comforted us, he lied to us, and then he tried to blame my girlfriend for what he did. He's a monster, and he deserved to spend the rest of his life in prison." Judge Lord Matthews then addressed Aaron directly before pronouncing sentence. "Aaron Campbell, you have been convicted by a jury of the abduction, rape, and murder of 6-year-old Alesha MacPhail. The crime you committed is amongst the most serious I have ever encountered in my time on the bench. Alesha was a defenseless little child, asleep in what should have been the safety of her bed. You took her from that bed, carried her to a remote location, and subjected her to the most horrific sexual assault and violent death. The pathologist's report details 117 separate injuries to her small body. She suffered terribly. Lord Matthews continued, "I have read the psychiatric reports about you, and they paint a deeply troubling picture. You show no remorse for what you have done. You show no empathy for the pain you have caused. You attempted to frame an innocent person for your crime, adding further cruelty to an already horrific situation. You are, in the assessment of multiple experts, a dangerous individual with psychopathic traits who poses a significant ongoing risk to the public. Under Scottish law, murder carries a mandatory sentence of life imprisonment. The question before me is what the minimum term should be before you can be considered for parole. The Crown has asked for a minimum term of 27 years, arguing that this reflects the exceptional gravity of your crimes and the danger you pose. Your defense has asked for a lower minimum term, citing your age and difficult upbringing. I have considered all of these factors carefully. While I acknowledge that you were 16 at the time of this offense and that you suffered a difficult childhood, these factors cannot excuse or significantly mitigate what you did. You planned this crime. You took a knife with you. You researched how to get away with murder. You showed calculation before, during, and after the offense. And you have shown absolutely no remorse. I therefore sentence you to life imprisonment. The minimum term you must serve before you can be considered for parole is 27 years. Given that you are now 17 years old, this means you will be at least 44 years old before you have any possibility of release. And I must emphasize that this is a minimum term. The parole board may very well determine that you should never be released. You will be on license for the rest of your life if you are ever freed. The sentence was one of the longest minimum terms ever imposed on a teenager in Scotland. The Scottish Prison Service immediately announced that Aaron would be transferred from the Young Offenders Institution to adult prison facilities once he turned 18 later that year. He would be held in segregation for his own protection, as prisoners convicted of crimes against children face significant danger from other inmates. But the story didn't end with sentencing. In a final twist that demonstrated the depths of Aaron's psychopathy, he asked to see his legal team before being transported back to prison. In that meeting, according to statements later filed with the court, Aaron admitted for the first time that he had indeed killed Alesha. He said he wanted to confess before sentencing so that the court would know the full truth, and then he added a statement that would shock everyone who heard it. "I am quite satisfied with the murder." He showed no emotion as he said this. No tears, no regret, just cold satisfaction in what he had done. This confession was relayed to Judge Lord Matthews and included in the sentencing remarks. It eliminated any lingering doubt about Aaron's guilt and confirmed what the psychiatric reports had suggested, that Aaron Campbell was a genuine psychopath, incapable of normal human emotion or empathy. In the years since his conviction, Aaron Campbell has been held in various Scottish prisons, always in segregation for his protection. He has been attacked by other prisoners on multiple occasions, despite the security measures in place. Child killers are universally despised in prison culture, and Aaron's young age and lack of remorse make him a particular target for violence. He has spent much of his sentence in solitary confinement, with minimal human contact beyond prison staff and occasional approved visitors. In 2020, Aaron's legal team filed an appeal against his conviction and sentence, arguing that the minimum term of 27 years was excessive for someone who was 16 at the time of the offense. The appeal was heard by the Court of Criminal Appeal in Edinburgh. After reviewing all the evidence and arguments, the court agreed that a slight reduction was warranted given Aaron's age at the time, and they reduced the minimum term from 27 years to 24 years. This means Aaron will be eligible for parole consideration at age 40 rather than 44. However, the court emphasized that this reduction did not diminish the gravity of his crimes, and that there was no guarantee he would ever be released, even after serving the minimum term. Aaron has declined most interview requests,
and has maintained a low profile within the prison system. Reports from corrections officers describe him as manipulative, calculating, and completely unrepentant. He has shown no interest in rehabilitation programs and expresses no remorse for his crimes. Psychologists who have evaluated him in prison report that his psychopathic traits remain pronounced and that he continues to pose a significant danger to the public, particularly to children. The Isle of Bute has struggled to heal from the trauma of Alesha's murder. The close-knit community, which prided itself on its safety and trust, was shattered by the realization that such evil could exist in their midst. Many families with young children left the island in the aftermath of the murder, unable to feel safe there anymore. Those who remained have had to rebuild their sense of security, installing locks and security systems in homes that had never needed them before. The Kyle's hotel site where Alesha was murdered has become an unofficial memorial. Local residents have placed flowers, stuffed animals, and other tributes there, and the area is maintained by volunteers who ensure it remains a place of remembrance, rather than just a crime scene. Plans to develop the site have been put on hold indefinitely out of respect for Alesha's memory. Georgina Loughran has become an advocate for child safety and victims' rights, channeling her grief into action. She has worked with legislators to strengthen laws around child protection and has pushed for longer sentences for those who commit crimes against children. She established the Alesha MacPhail Memorial Fund, which provides support to families affected by violent crime and funds educational programs about child safety. Alesha's life was stolen from her, but her memory will live on through the good we can do in her name, Georgina has said in public statements. Robert MacPhail has struggled more privately with his grief and guilt. He has spoken about the crushing weight of wondering if things might have been different if he had locked the door that night, if he had checked on Alesha one more time, if he had never invited her to Bute at all. Rationally, he knows that none of this is his fault, that Aaron Campbell alone bears responsibility for what happened. But the what-ifs haunt him nonetheless. He continues to live on Bute, unable to leave the island where his daughter spent her final days. The case of Aaron Campbell raises profound questions about evil, responsibility, and justice. Here was a teenager, still legally a child in many respects, who committed acts of such extreme violence and depravity that they would be shocking coming from anyone of any age. The psychiatric evaluations consistently described him as having psychopathic personality traits, including a lack of empathy, manipulativeness, and an inability to form genuine emotional connections. These are not traits that develop overnight. They represent deep-seated personality characteristics that likely existed long before he killed Alesha. This raises uncomfortable questions about nature versus nurture. Was Aaron born this way, with a brain wired differently from most people, incapable of normal empathy and moral reasoning? Or was he made this way, shaped by a childhood of neglect, instability, and trauma? Most experts believe it's a combination of both, that Aaron likely had innate personality traits that made him vulnerable to developing psychopathy, and that his chaotic upbringing and lack of positive guidance allowed those traits to develop unchecked. Could Aaron's descent into violence have been prevented? There were warning signs throughout his childhood and adolescence: the behavioral problems at school, the cruelty to animals, the concerning internet searches, the bringing of a knife to school. But none of these warning signs were taken seriously enough to trigger meaningful intervention. Social services were aware of his difficult home situation, but never removed him from his mother's care. Schools noted his problems, but never insisted on psychological evaluation. The systems that are supposed to protect children and identify those at risk of becoming violent failed Aaron, and ultimately failed Alesha even more catastrophically. The question of how to prevent the next Aaron Campbell is one that society continues to grapple with. Do we need better mental health screening for children and adolescents? More resources for social services to intervene in troubled families? Stricter monitoring of children's internet activity to identify those consuming violent and disturbing content? Better training for teachers to recognize warning signs? All of these measures could potentially help, but they also raise concerns about privacy, resources, and the practical challenges of identifying the tiny fraction of troubled youth who will go on to commit serious violence. The case also raises questions about how society should respond when children commit adult crimes. Aaron was 16 when he murdered Alesha. His brain was not fully developed. Neuroscience shows that the prefrontal cortex, which governs impulse control and long-term decision-making, doesn't fully mature until the mid-20s. Does this mean he deserves more leniency than an adult who commits the same crime? The Scottish courts said no. The nature of the crime was so severe, the planning so evident, the lack of remorse so complete, that Aaron's youth could not shield him from a life sentence. But there are those who argue that sentencing a 16-year-old to effectively spend his entire life in prison is cruel, that it gives up on the possibility of rehabilitation, that it assumes a teenager's character is fixed and cannot change. They point to other cases where juvenile offenders, even those who committed serious crimes, have been rehabilitated and eventually reintegrated into society as productive adults. Should Aaron be given that chance? The counterargument is equally compelling. Some crimes are so heinous, some individuals so dangerous, that public safety must take precedence over rehabilitation. Aaron Campbell raped and murdered a 6-year-old child. He has shown no remorse. He has been assessed by multiple mental health professionals as having psychopathic traits that are notoriously resistant to treatment. The risk that he poses to the public, particularly to children, is substantial. Releasing him, even decades from now, could result in more victims. Is that a risk society should take? These are questions without easy answers. What is clear is that the case of Aaron Campbell represents a failure on multiple levels. A failure of families, of communities, of systems, and ultimately, a catastrophic failure of one individual who chose evil over humanity. For Alesha MacPhail, there is no silver lining, no redemption arc, no way to make sense of senseless violence. She was 6 years old. She loved Peppa Pig and pink clothes and her family. She had done nothing wrong. She was simply a child, existing in the world, entitled to the same basic safety and security that every human being deserves. Aaron Campbell stole all of that from her in the darkest hours of a summer night, on an island that was supposed to be safe. Her family carries the weight of that loss every single day. Empty chairs at birthday parties and holidays. A bedroom that will never be used again. A future full of milestones. First day of school, graduations, weddings, grandchildren, that will never happen. This is the real impact of murder. Not just one life lost, but countless lives forever changed, forever diminished by the absence of someone who should be there. And Aaron Campbell, who caused all of this pain and destruction, sits in a prison cell, serving what will likely be the rest of his life behind bars. He is now in his mid-20s, having spent his entire adult life in prison. He will likely die in prison decades from now, having never experienced adult life in the outside world. Whether this constitutes justice or simply vengeance, whether it makes society safer or just more punitive, whether it represents the best we can do or a failure of imagination about rehabilitation, these debates will continue long after Aaron Campbell is forgotten. But Alesha MacPhail will not be forgotten. Her name is spoken with love and grief. Her photo still appears in memorials and tributes. Her short life touched more people than many who live to old age, and in the collective memory of Scotland, she represents innocence stolen, safety shattered, and the enduring human capacity for both profound evil and enduring love. The case of Aaron Campbell, from innocence to infamy, stands as one of the darkest chapters in recent Scottish criminal history. It reminds us that monsters can wear young faces, that evil can exist in places we believe to be safe, and that the line between childhood and adulthood, between human and monster, between redemption and damnation, is sometimes impossible to define. All we are left with is grief, anger, and the desperate hope that somehow, someday, we can prevent the next Alesha from dying at the hands of the next Aaron Campbell.